Breaking news. Volodymyr Zelensky has already arrived in the United States, but it's still not very clear why. Yes, to receive, as he initially thought, the historic support of Donald Trump in the form of Tomahawks, or a setback of even greater proportions. And having to return to Ukraine empty-handed? Right now, according to the latest information, the Ukrainian delegation is being humiliated in every detail, both upon their arrival and on their way to the negotiations with Donald Trump. But there's even more, and it could be that all of this is part of a carefully measured and detailed plan by Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. Yes, it could be that the delivery of the Tomahawks was initially just a lure to attract Vladimir Zelensky to the White House, and from there, to carry out a plan of, indeed, to gradually end the conflict, but by making very significant concessions to the Russian Federation. Let's look at it in detail. Let's start, as usual, with the facts. Volodymyr Zelensky was arriving in the United States, and while he was in flight, this absolutely historic call took place between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. All of this with the Tomahawks in the background, which it's still unclear whether they will finally be delivered to Ukraine or not. But the chances have been decreasing over the last few hours, to the point of reaching Donald Trump's statements, where he literally said that the Tomahawks are very good, really very good, but they are still needed in the United States.
We need Tomahawks for the United States of America as well. We have many, and we need them. They're reliable and good, but necessary too.
These statements come right after the call between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, where they agreed, according to information already confirmed by both the White House and the Kremlin, a meeting first between the highest-level delegations, which already seems to be in preparation, but later, an even more important event, another meeting directly between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, which will take place in Budapest. And the sanctions? What? Well, just wait, sweetheart, because this is where Vladimir Zelensky's path of humiliation begins. First point, it seems confirmed the European Union will go. The sanctions imposed against the Russian Federation do not prevent Vladimir Putin or the foreign minister of that country from flying comfortably and calmly to Hungary. The sanctions work, they said, but apparently, they forgot to add that they work mainly in favor of the Russian Federation. Double humiliation here. On one hand, Hungary represents something like an arch-enemy of Ukraine in the European Union, and on the other hand, it represents the most rebellious country in the European Union itself, and therefore almost like an arch-enemy of itself. However, the setbacks for Volodymyr Zelensky and the entire Kyiv regime as a whole have only just begun. On one hand, Donald Trump, of course, is there. He didn't inform Zelensky that this call with Vladimir Putin was going to take place. Much less did he do so when Zelensky had already taken off on his way to Washington. There are sources that say all of this is part of a carefully organized and detailed plan. And what they hoped to achieve was exactly that. That is, that Zelensky couldn't do anything except really stay in the air and continue on his way to Washington. In other words, the intention was to prevent Vladimir Zelensky, at all costs, after this phone call between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. What did all this change? Quite a few things in the international scene with that possible meeting, and it left Zelensky in a rather questionable position, since he couldn't consult with his real masters. According to several sources, they are not so much in the United States, which of course as well, but mostly in the United Kingdom. This should be framed within the overall theory, according to which all of this is part of a plan that was devised between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin at their meeting in Alaska. Let's look at it in even more detail, but before that, there are some details that simply shouldn't escape our attention. Vladimir Zelensky arrived in the United States, and here the parallel with Zelensky is absolutely necessary because, well, in the United States, that figure, supposedly very important for the Trump administration, was received by Mr. Yermak, who is the head of the presidential office of Ukraine. Yes, from the very presidential office of Vladimir Zelensky himself and the two pilots who had brought Zelensky to that place. Come on, it had absolutely nothing to do with that reception. I wouldn't say it was absolutely historic, like the one the United States gave, almost personally. Donald Trump organized for Vladimir Putin to be escorted by American fighter jets, accompanying the Russian presidential plane, with the red carpet included, with that absolutely historic handshake between both leaders, images of which were later published by the White House itself, with the most triumphant music possible. Not to mention, of course, the most relevant detail of all this, that Donald Trump himself was there to personally welcome Vladimir Putin. Meanwhile, Vladimir Zelensky, I repeat, has been received by his own chief of the presidential office. And what about the pilots who brought him there? The media defeat was already set. And to that were added Donald Trump's statements about the Tomahawks. But on top of that, the Western media kept commenting on the surprise of the Ukrainian delegation itself, namely, Zelensky and his team were surprised to see Trump's statement that he had spoken with Vladimir Putin and agreed to meet with him in Hungary, the least friendly country toward Ukraine in the European Union. Axios writes this, but there's more. The Zeit also reports on it. This shows the surprise of the Ukrainian delegation regarding this meeting that was organized. He seemed to appear out of nowhere. Vladimir Putin shows, once again, that the United States administration does not recognize the government of Kyiv as an equal partner in the negotiations. Europeans might also feel offended because the most rebellious member of the European Union was chosen as the place for the bilateral meeting, and everyone else was excluded from participating again. Oops, don't tell me this could all have been a carefully orchestrated show. The truth is that now several sources are confirming not only the surprise on Zelensky's delegation, but also absolute panic within it. They don't know what to say, who to talk to, or what to expect from this meeting with Donald Trump, whose consequences, without a doubt, we will discuss as soon as possible, of course, on my Telegram channel. So I invite you to subscribe there if you haven't done so yet. But tomorrow, without a doubt, in a much more detailed and thorough way, in the next report of this incredible saga. Right now, it seems pretty clear that this reaction of absolute surprise was exactly what Donald Trump wanted to provoke. It's not clear whether it was aimed at the entire Ukrainian delegation or at Volodymyr Zelensky personally. There are two theories to mention here, which, by the way, can be quite complementary to each other. First of all, there were reports, even after the summit in Alaska between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, that from that point on, a carefully organized plan had been launched by both leaders to try to effectively grant victory to the Russian Federation, without this meaning any failure or defeat for the United States. In other words, could it be that the Tomahawk issue was really a clever smokescreen, organized precisely to give the image and impression that it was Vladimir Putin himself, who was almost frightened by the military greatness of the United States and the possibility that it might directly attack the territory of the Russian Federation? With that, he agreed to talk to Donald Trump, and it could even be that he actually promoted this conversation, and the subsequent meeting between both leaders would allow them to continue taking steps toward peace, which indeed takes time, but at least in media terms, to keep negotiating and thus buy time. On one hand, for the United States, but especially for the Russian Federation, to end its special military operation, even if only in its main aspects, that is, based on the possible delivery of Tomahawks, which could be exactly what so frightened the Russian Federation. Well, these conditions would later have to be accepted by Ukraine, and therefore ultimately also by the United States, which would undoubtedly involve significant territorial concessions and surrenders. Well, they wouldn't be seen by the media as either a tactical or strategic defeat, and in fact, they could be presented as such, especially by the Western media, as a very advantageous option for the West, and it's unclear how advantageous it would be for the Russian Federation. To this, We should add another theory that talks about a very tense personal relationship between Vladimir Zelensky and Donald Trump. Donald Trump had been holding a grudge since that very moment, in which, after one of the meetings that took place between both leaders, Zelensky snubbed him badly, agreeing to absolutely everything, and then going back to Kiev and pretty much saying the exact opposite. Well, but who is the real expert at changing the story at the last minute? I'm telling you, it won't be Volodymyr Zelensky, and it could be that this whole setup, including Zelensky's flight, while this phone call between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin was taking place, was actually in response to this. Another goal of putting the Ukrainian leader in his place, anyway, is precisely that Zelensky, it seems, is the one who loses the most in all of this. Because Russia gains time with this delivery of the Tomahawks, which no one knows if they will actually end up arriving or not. And in fact, even the mere possibility of it is already vanishing into thin air. On the other hand, Donald Trump gains even more media importance, rubs shoulders with the powerful, and speaks with Putin as an equal. He could even have another meeting with the leader of the Federation of, and ultimately, he has this strong and important position. In terms of the United States being there with its absolutely lethal weaponry, it could be that they might have the courtesy of not delivering it and thus betting definitively on peace. But what exactly does Vladimir Zelensky SIP gain? No matter how you look at it, it seems that Zelensky hasn't gotten anything but scoldings in this whole A3 story. No one takes him seriously. No one talks to him as an equal, which shows, once again, that Ukraine is just the battlefield, but not really one of the contenders, which, of course, is NATO, and ultimately, the United States, and also the United Kingdom. We will, of course, keep a very close watch on how things develop, because things are getting extremely interesting. But for now, what we can conclude is that the humiliation of Zelensky, his entire delegation, the whole Kiev regime, would you say, even from the United States and personally from Donald Trump, it has been absolutely historic. Because where they came expecting absolute victories and tomahawks, now they have to leave looking foolish, empty-handed, and with their tails between their legs.